The fig tree had looked alive. The temple looked holy. By the next morning, one was dead, and the other was doomed. We're studying Mark 11:20 to 25. Let's read verses 20 and 21 from the ESV. As they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." When did this happen? About 24 hours after Jesus cursed this fig tree, because it presented itself as fruitful, but was in fact barren. Where was this tree? Along the way from Bethany, where Jesus and the 12 are staying, and the temple side of Jerusalem. Yesterday the tree was in leaf, giving the impression that it offered nourishment. Today, they see that it is withered or desiccated. It's all dried out. This is not just the seasonal leaf loss of deciduous trees. How can we know that? Mark tells us the tree is withered from the roots. So what? In keeping with Jesus' curse from the day before, a tree withered from the roots won't come back in the next growth season. This is permanent death. Once again, Mark records Peter as the spokesman for the apostles. And what Peter says is fascinating. First he says, "Rabbi, look." He calls Jesus' attention to the fig tree. Did Jesus not see it? I think the rest of the story shows that Jesus did not need to look at the tree because he had total confidence about the tree's fate when he cursed it. Then, Peter states the obvious. The tree you cursed has completely withered. Let's focus on Peter for a moment. Is Peter surprised that the tree is withered? Does Peter think Jesus will be surprised? Did Peter assume that the curse had been empty talk from Jesus? Or did Peter believe that Jesus was earnest, but expected nothing to happen? Before we move on, if you've watched the last few videos in the series, you know that this fig tree served as a metaphor for the temple. The tree looked fruitful and was attractive, but was barren. It's now barren forever. Yesterday, Jesus cast out all the people who had turned the temple into a den of robbers. What are the implications of the withered tree for the temple? Let me know what you think in the comments. On to verses 22 and 23. And Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him." Jesus doesn't just speak to Peter. He talks to the 12 to make sense of the withered fig tree. First and foremost, he says, "Have faith in God." That's the key. That's why Jesus isn't surprised by the withered fig tree. How important is that principle? How powerful? So much so that a person with faith in God can speak a mountain into the sea. But wait, Jesus said, "You can speak to this mountain." Which mountain? Look at this map. They've been staying nights in Bethany and days in Jerusalem. On the way to Jerusalem, the dominant element of the landscape is the Temple Mount. In the context of chapter 11, we've moved from the temple to the fig tree, back to the temple. And now we're back at the fig tree. The fig tree is a metaphor for the temple. So while standing by the fig tree, when Jesus says, "Whoever says to this mountain," he's surely talking about the Temple Mount. For a person who believes in God, a pronouncement made in faith, with no doubt that the Temple Mount should be taken up and cast into the sea, will see it done. Just like when Jesus judged the fig tree and condemned it, it was withered from the roots. As sure as the tree withered, the temple would be thrown down. What looked immovable and permanent is not. In about 40 years from cursing the fig tree, in 70 AD, the temple would be destroyed to such an extent that it was unrecognizable as a structure. Judgment was coming for the temple as surely as it came for the fig tree. Look at verse 24. "Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." How did we get from mountain tossing to prayer? Do you remember what Jesus said about the temple when he cleansed it? He called it a house of prayer for all the nations. So he advises the 12, whatever you ask in prayer, believe it. Don't just go through motions or create an appearance. There's no point in that. It's phony and misleading, like the fig tree and the temple had been. But the better example is Jesus speaking the curse to the fig tree, in absolute faith, and it was done. Let's move on to verse 25. And whenever you stand praying, forgive, if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. And how did we get to forgiveness? The temple is a house of prayer, where people offered sacrifices to receive forgiveness of sins and reconciliation with God. Verse 25 connects the tree and the temple to a personal ethic. The tree and the temple looked alive and fruitful, but were really barren and a den of robbers. What does that have to do with the prayers of Jesus' followers? When they pray, seeking forgiveness for their own sins, in order to be real and not fake, they had better be forgivers of others. If they are not, they will be as false as the fig tree and the temple. And the tree and the temple show that false appearances receive judgment and condemnation. What can we take away from these verses? The temple, as intended by God, was to be a place of prayer and forgiveness. The disciples, as intended by God, are to believe in God for real, not just in outward appearances. They are to pray in faith, without doubt. And if they seek and expect forgiveness, they have to be people who forgive others. Why? Because to not forgive others betrays a falsity in your belief in God's forgiveness. This story isn't about random mountain throwing. It's deeply rooted in the withered tree as a metaphor for the corrupted temple, and the importance of a belief in God that governs actions, attitudes, and faith and sincerity. Next time, the chief priest and scribes ask Jesus who he thinks he is. You don't want to miss it. Thanks again for studying with me. Please recommend this series to your friends.